This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Yo. That's it. That's the entire intro. I have nothing else to add. No, actually, that's a lie. We're back at it again. Which means if you've been following the channel for a while, you know what's in store for today. Doing the Lord's work here on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. Talking about some classic wrestling. I don't know why I emphasized classic. But you know what I could emphasize is pro wrestling. Wish we had more people in the wrestling community that actually valued classic content. As opposed to whatever this modern garbage is that people watch most weeks. But nothing's new. I've been the crusty old guy that yells at the clouds for as long as I can remember. Pretty much since I started the channel. I gave plenty of things a shot. I gave MLW a shot. They failed to impress me. I gave the NWA a shot. They failed to impress me. I gave AEW a shot. They epically failed to impress me. That leaves us with WWE, I guess. They haven't impressed me with their product for eons, but at least when I watch SmackDown, I'm usually not insulted for having watched the show. I'm just bored out of my mind because nothing of intrigue ever happens on that program. But that's why we do the Friday show. So I can come on here and talk about stuff that I actually like. And then, of course, poke fun at the stupid stuff. And we're coming up on a pretty significant downturn with the Crockett reviews in the next year or two. Things are already starting to tilt downwards as we speak, but it's been incremental. It's a lot of the management stuff that's kind of affecting the on-screen product. And after Starrcade, it's pretty much a steady decline from then on. A couple bright spots here and there, but well, they'll become few and far between before you know it. We'll just leave the conversation at that. So on that bright note, how about that Crockett show? And I knew this one was off the rails before it even got underway. When your cold open is a highlight reel of Kendall Windham in a squash match, you may as well just phone it in. Ain't nothing saving the show. It also doesn't help their case when the first thing we see from the Atlanta studios is David Crockett going, "The very best of professional wrestling." And there's a very long pause as he waits for Tony Schiavone to provide input. And Tony does not say anything. And the silence continues. We are 20 seconds into the program, and it's already train wreck television. So David finally just goes, "Isn't it?" That is where I knew it is going to be a long 90 minutes this week. I can already tell. And if those two previous talking points were not already a bad sign of things to come, they followed a Kendall Windham highlight reel, plus David Crockett's awkward commentary, with a Ron Simmons promo. I cannot remember the last time Ron Simmons was on this show. I think he's worked one television squash. And they sent him out here to basically talk about Starrcade. That was it. He said that the event would be worse than a war in the projects. Not really sure how that lent itself to positive news, but I mean, then again, I couldn't figure out what the hell Ron was saying for the majority of this promo. Just sounded like he was gargling with marbles the entire time. But that took us to our first TV match for the week. It's Dr. Death Steve Williams versus Rex King. This was definitely the period in the taping schedule where they rounded up all the former UWF guys and said, all right, now it's your turn. And what we had here was some good old-fashioned sandbagging, where Dr. Death did about 75 power moves in a row. Rex did not want to go up for virtually half of them. And finally, Steve got sick of dealing with this guy's bullshit, so he killed him with an Oklahoma Stampede. And then David Crockett yelled, "Power Slam!" After another long-winded moment of dead air time where the commentators were utterly silent. Yeah. Speaking of long-winded, that is exactly what Dr. Death was in his follow-up promo. Long-winded, rambling, and terrible. Here's legitimately everything that happened. He said that when he and Barry get in the ring at Starrcade for their UWF heavyweight title match, they're going to be standing across the ring going one-on-one like a football contest or a wrestling match. He actually said those words. He compared a professional wrestling match to a wrestling match. Then he basically did a roundabout promo on how they were going to wrestle and have a professional wrestling match. They were going to lay on the mat in holds. They're going to work a body part. They're going to do collar and elbow tie-ups. Buy your fucking ticket now, dude. To see Barry Windham and Dr. Death do lockups. Riveting. Now I'm going to hold Steve to that one. By God, when I watch that Starrcade show in 2 weeks, if I don't see a fucking collar and elbow lockup, heads will roll. So 10 minutes in, I was already over the show entirely. And then coming back from break, we are at the Starrcade Control Center where Tony begins running down the full card again. And basically a two-part segment here. First, he had Jim Crockett and Johnny Weaver sitting beside him. And they wanted to introduce the final stipulation to the already hat-on-a-hat-on-a-hat stipulation match for the Luger-Dusty U.S. title showdown. Not only is it for the U.S. heavyweight title, not only is it Dusty's career versus Luger's title, even though it's more like Dusty has to leave Crockett for 90 days if he loses. Not only is it a cage match, but now we're being told that Johnny Weaver is going to be the special gatekeeper. He will be holding on to the key at ringside to prevent anybody from entering or exiting the cage. And once they made that announcement, we then got a recap of the Mighty Wilbur squashing Puddinhead Paul Jones like a grape. At which point we cut to the Mighty Wilbur in the studio, who has now either taken the place of Jim Crockett and Johnny Weaver or has eaten them both. And he wants to let us know that he is wrestling Ivan Koloff at Starrcade. And he's also daring Paul Jones to stick his face in the ring and see what happens. And, that alone was all fine and good. The actual delivery from Wilbur was wretched because the guy legitimately could not cut a promo. But I did laugh. Right at the end, as Tony goes to pitch to break, we actually see the shadow of Wilbur's hand in the background as he's waving to the camera. Tony's desperately trying not to laugh. That part was great. But it is official. The Mighty Wilbur versus Ivan Koloff. Starrcade 87. Probably given time. Sounds remarkably atrocious. Which took us to Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin versus Gary Phelps and Eric Long. And it was fairly uneventful right up until the point where Eric Long decided to sandbag Garvin on a stun gun attempt. And then Garvin and Hayes just started mercilessly beating the shit out of the guy. They toyed with him for about an hour, refused to pin him. David Crockett was legitimately marking out for everything Hayes and Garvin did. And about 15 minutes and several moonwalk spots later, Hayes planted one of the fat job guys with a bulldog and pinned him. And then we came back for, as I wrote down, fired up gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and coked out of his mind Michael P.S. Hayes. Well, first they sold the big six-man at the pay-per-view. Obviously the one they're involved with. Jimmy Garvin said something about him and Hayes going after the World Tag Belts. Whether it's the Road Warriors or Tully and Arn, they don't care. Which got me thinking, I'd have loved to have seen Michael Hayes working with stiff as fuck Hawk and Animal. That would have been a sight to behold. And then Hayes talked about all the stakes on the line. Money, greed, titles, the whole 9 yards. I was mainly fixated on Precious. She didn't say anything. But, well, you know, she was there. So naturally, that's where my eyes gravitated toward. It was not Michael Hayes' chest hair. I can tell you that much. Then we had Rick Steiner versus Keith Steinborn, which was mainly notable for two things. One was the set of teenage boys in the front row marking out for everything and being way too excited about watching Rick Steiner kill people. The other was David Crockett, who, as I look back now, may have been one of the few redeeming qualities about this week's program. There's a spot in this match where Rick goes to pick up Keith and drive him into the corner while he had him over his shoulder. When Rick drove this guy into the buckle, I mean, I don't even mean to sound crude when I say this out loud. David Crockett legitimately ejaculated. His exact quote was, "Oh, yeah, 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 woo!" Now you tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that was not a grown man having a legit orgasm on live broadcast cable television. Steiner went over with a belly-to-belly. I believe this is also the first sighting of Rick Steiner on NWA television, right? At least in person. I don't recall them ever airing any UWF footage of him. You know, it's funny how last week we were talking about the phasing out of the old guard around this point in 87. Guys like Luger and Barry and Sting, all the younger guys that were being built up as the next generation of the company. You know, those guys all started coming to the forefront of the programming. I forgot to throw Rick Steiner in there as another notable name. But, yeah. He's another guy to keep your eyes peeled for because he's going to be a breakout star pretty soon. Then we had the best part of the show. The Spam Slam of the Week. Brought to you by Hornell's Spam. A product that has been on the market since 1937. Just in case y'all want to feel old. For anybody's grandfathers that fought in World War II, if they're still alive, have them tell you stories about Hornell's Spam. Back when you were really desperate to eat on the battlefield. Your choice was canned ham or fucking dirt. and the dirt probably tasted better. So, of course, who was the featured plug for a Spam Slam this week? None other than Ronnie Garvin, delivering those signature Garvin stomps to whatever job guy he wrestled last week. Very apropos. This guy got spammed into oblivion, courtesy of Garvin's boot. I hope we get more of these commercials. Then from there, we had Dusty and Nikita out at the booth for another Starrcade plug. Nikita talked about how he wished Starrcade was tomorrow so he could wake up and show up in Chicago to fight Eddie Gilbert and Terry Taylor. We also had Dusty yelling something about the danger zone. And talked about how Starrcade is about guts and pride. He's laying it all on the line at Starrcade when he steps into the cage with Luger. And he hopes that Luger knows the kind of environment he's putting himself in. Because when the cage door shuts, it's on like Donkey Kong. He didn't actually say that part, but that was more or less the message. They also had the camera zoomed in pretty much all the way, revealing Dusty's very purple, lacerated forehead from all those blade jobs. A sight that, well, probably doesn't need to be broken down in further detail. Then we went back to the ring for Ricky Santana versus Bob Emery. They wrestled for about 2 minutes, and then Santana won with a diving body press. I have nothing else to add. Nor did David Crockett, as his final words to cap off the segment were, "Good." And then they moved on. That was followed with Ricky boring the brakes off of everybody with a Spanish-speaking promo until Kevin Sullivan interrupted and cut quite possibly an even more indecipherable promo than the one Ricky was trying to cut. Now, I've already elaborated on why I've given up trying to make sense of Kevin Sullivan promos, but if you need any further explanation as to why I've given up, let me explain what happened here. At the same time Sullivan is out there burying Ron Garvin, saying he has no chance of beating Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight title, he then begins to bury Luger by saying he has no chance of beating Dusty. And if that didn't already leave your head spinning, as Kevin's putting over the baby faces and the heels at the same time, then he randomly starts talking about Dr. Death Steve Williams and says that he's one of the fastest rising stars in the sport of wrestling. Which is a little bit of foreshadowing, I guess, if you know what's coming up with all the Varsity Club business. But even as I go back and look at what Sullivan was talking about here, I mean, let's just call it like it is. He was playing the role of dirt sheet spoiler. He outright gave away the finishes of the top 2 title programs at Starrcade. I'm like, was that supposed to be Sullivan's gimmick for everything that predated the Varsity Club? Like he just comes out on TV every week and works the role of Dave Meltzer? What is this guy's fucking gimmick? Why does no one ever bring up the initial Crockett run for Kevin Sullivan in late 87? Where you can't make heads or tails of whether or not the guy's supposed to be a good guy or a bad guy. Probably because it sucks. You know what didn't suck, though? Was Tully and Arn beating ass. Yeah. They faced El Negro and BT Washington. And as soon as I got done laughing at the ridiculous name of BT Washington, they gave me a chance to relish in Tully and Arn killing these flat-footed geeks in the ring. I mean, the match only went 90 seconds, but it was still fun for the time it got. Tully and Arn went over with the double gourd buster, which did not look easy. Trying to get El Negro up in the air for this move. He was a big dude. And he did not go up easy for these two guys. There was a lot of sandbagging going on this week. What is it with these stupid job guys? They also got to cut a promo afterwards. And, even Tully addressed how big Negro was, saying he was 350 pounds. Yet he and Arn got him up for the Gourd Buster with ease. And if the people at home think the Horseman can't do that to a 280-pound Road Warrior Animal or a 270-pound Road Warrior Hawk, well, they got another thing coming, brother. We also had Arn cutting a hell of a promo here, basically inferring that the Road Warriors are nothing more than a couple of meathead powerlifters. Arn and Tully may not be the strongest of the two teams, but they have the intelligence and the skill to put down the Legion of Doom. And it's so amazing. I mean, you go back and look at this title program. On paper, if you're a casual fan that's watched Crockett Promotions for the last year, and you've seen Hawk and Animal destroy virtually every tag team put in front of them, you look at them going up against the Horsemen, and you're like, well, why would it be any different? Shouldn't Hawk and Animal just barrel right through Tully and Arn? Well, the great thing about it is that Tully and Arn are playing it totally serious. Even if they may be scared shitless, they're not out there letting everyone know it. They're confident, trying to demonstrate to the people that they're capable of beating the Road Warriors, even if most people are skeptical of it. And it's such a great way to build up the animosity between the two teams. The Road Warriors are like sharks smelling blood in the water. They can see the fear on Tully and Arn, but meanwhile, Tully and Arn are selling it like they're confident and poised. They're like, we ain't sweating the Road Warriors. They're just a couple of mean steroid guys that throw people around and stick their tongues out. Sure, they've killed just about every tag team they faced, and they're still undefeated. Barely ever been taken off their feet. But we can beat them. I love the way they gone about booking this. It's just a shame the end result was them killing Chicago when the Road Warriors didn't walk out with the belts. But we'll talk about that fiasco in a couple weeks. Then we came back for Ivan Koloff and the Warlord versus Kurt Thompson and Max McGiver. Are we sure this guy wasn't Mike McGiver like 4 weeks ago? No, it didn't matter because Warlord and Koloff killed both these guys in like 30 seconds. And then we had Paul Jones in a follow-up promo where he was making fun of the mighty Wilbur, calling him a no-good grape picker, and that Jones was going to send him back to California on his pickup truck. These were intended to be insults, by the way. In 1987, calling somebody a gutless fruit picker, that was deemed an insult, apparently. Meanwhile, in 2023, you can basically call someone a shithead on TV and you won't even get censored. But, Ivan basically vowed that he wouldn't let Paul down. Said he was going to beat the ugly out of Wilbur's body. To which I retorted, that's a lot of ugly. But that was pretty much that. Oh yeah, and the Warlord was there. He had big arms. That was my other takeaway. Then we came back at the top of the hour for a J.J. Luger interview. And J.J. selling the stipulations for Starrcade. He says that he got everything he wanted out of the contractual deal. And when Luger walks out of the cage at Starrcade as a champion, Dusty will be out of sight, out of mind for 90 days. And then Luger just kind of touched on all those talking points again. Really didn't have much to add. He said he would prove he's the superior athlete. Which, I mean, we think a lot of things when it comes to Dusty Rhodes in this sport. Athlete? Not one of them. I think Luger's got that in the bag. And then Luger proceeded to have the worst match of his career with Tony Suber, where they somehow managed to fuck up everything they tried. They botched an Irish whip spot in the corner where Suber basically tripped over himself and bumbled his way back to the middle of the ring. Even David Crockett couldn't hide how horrible that looked. And after about 2 more minutes of Luger working the arm, he goes to set up Suber for the rack. And he gets him about partially all the way up. He then proceeds to lose his grip as he has the guy draped over his shoulder. And I'm not kidding when I tell you this. I thought the guy was dead. When Luger dropped this man right on the back of his head, and Suber is just laying there sprawled out, unmoving, I thought Luger killed him. Even the announcers were eerily quiet. Probably thinking to themselves, we just witnessed manslaughter on live broadcast television, folks. No, somehow Suber was not dead. And Luger just dropped an elbow and pinned him. Probably figuring, well, there's no way I'm getting this big fucker up over my shoulder again, so let's go with plan B. I'll drop an elbow. Because, you know, you couldn't just pin the guy after you basically paralyzed him by dropping him on his fucking neck. Nah, man. Got to drop that elbow for extra measure. Oh, fuck. Thank God Ric Flair was out next to take my mind off that hideous display. He's out there doing what I can merely coin as the Golden Spoon promo, because that was basically the centerpiece to his talking points here. All the luxury things that Flair possesses, the cars, the clothes, the jewelry, the girls, the homes, it all came to him because he was born with the golden spoon in his mouth. Now, he's not even out there trying to pretend to be a common man. He just says, I was born rich, and I'm not afraid to brag about it. He says that with the luxury lifestyle comes the lifestyle of a champion, and Flair does not know how to live any other way. He was born a champion, and he will die a champion. Which means there's one thing left to do. He's got to go into Starrcade, beat Ronnie Garvin, and get his belt back. It's, it's definitely a prototypical heel Ric Flair promo. I mean, you could tell he wasn't even trying to kiss up to the Horseman fans this week. He said, you will all boo me because I know how to get under your skin. I will talk about how poor everybody is. I still think he only managed to piss off about 80% of the crowd. But points for effort. It's very hard to boo the Nature Boy. Just always going to be swimming upstream trying to fight that. He's too cool. And then coming back from break, we had a campfire discussion about the upcoming 3rd annual Bunkhouse Stampede. And it was a legit campfire discussion. I think they had Nelson Royal out there doing the monologue. Hard to tell because it was almost pitch black. We also had loud acoustic guitar music in the background. Nearly drowned out the entirety of what Royal was saying. But, yeah, that was pretty much it. It was funny seeing all the various shots of the Battle Royals from the previous Bunkhouse matches. And in the middle of the fray, you get shots of Barry Windham and Dusty Rhodes and Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, and among all the guys in the ring, who should be right at the center of the shot but the Raging Bull getting smashed in the head with a trash can lid? I'm like, yeah, totally forgot about that. The fact that Manny was long gone from the company by this point. So that brought us back to the studio for Trucker Ronnie, sporting that classic denim on denim look. Well, the promo itself was actually really good. Talking about how Ric Flair likes to come out here and talk about being born with a golden spoon in his mouth. Well, if he doesn't take it out of his mouth when he gets into the ring with Garvin at Starrcade, he's going to take that spoon and stick it where the sun don't shine. He tells Flair for years he's preached about being the 60-minute man, when the reality is he only lasted 41 minutes with Garvin in Detroit inside the cage. And that makes Flair a liar. God forbid. And it's not going to take Ronnie 60 minutes to beat Flair at Starrcade. It'll take him 30 or less. And when it's all said and done, he's going to make sure that Flair can't live that luxury lifestyle he claims to have. Without the world's title, he can't afford to have nice things. And Ronnie will make sure he keeps it that way. He also told us he plans on driving his truck and wearing jeans after he beats Flair. Yes, that was actually a thing he said. After he beats Flair at Starrcade, he will continue to drive his truck and wear blue jeans. Is it any wonder people found this guy so uncool? Think about how ridiculous that is. It's one thing to say, I'm a man of the people. It is another thing to say, I like beat-up pickup trucks and wearing my jeans. If that is supposed to get over with the cool kids, newsflash, it didn't. So here's another long-lost memory of Crockett Promotions. You don't hear many people bring this up. Y'all remember when Baby Doll made her 57th return to NWA television completely unadvertised? Well, she's back. Again. Very slimmed down. And this time she is at ringside serving as Larry Zbyszko's eye candy. There are many things I remember about Baby Doll's Crockett run. Larry Zbyszko's valet. Not one of them. God, the last time we saw her, I don't even remember what she was doing at the time. Didn't she randomly come back for one or two tapings managing the Midnight Express? That was when Corny was out of commission getting ACL surgery. So we're going back almost a full calendar year. Now here she is popping up on television with Larry Zbyszko of all people. What? Yeah, I don't know. Well, looking past that, Larry beat up Ricky Nelson for a couple minutes and then won with a neck breaker. At which point he cut a promo with the booth indicating to the people that the reason he brought Baby Doll aboard was because Zbyszko wants the top gold. And in order to win the top gold, he has to beat the very best talent on his way up the ladder. And since Baby Doll's been around, she has all the dirty little secrets about all the top guys in Crockett Promotions. Whether it's Flair, Dusty, Barry Windham, doesn't matter. So, if I'm correct, The point is, Baby Doll has slept around with all the boys in the locker room, and she's gotten to know them on a personal basis. Therefore, she's able to feed Larry advice on how to become world champion by exposing their weaknesses. That is fucking genius. Why has nobody ever thought of a story like that in wrestling before? Buying the hot girl services because you know that she slept around with all the previous top champions. Therefore, she has the dirty scoop. She knows everything about them. Therefore, she's able to give you all the ins and outs of how to take them down. Larry Zbyszko. A clever fucking dude. Doesn't get enough credit for that. So while we stew on the future of Baby Doll and Larry Zbyszko, let's briefly turn to Eddie Gilbert and Terry Taylor versus George Fox and Trent Knight. They did some spots for about a minute until Taylor and Gilbert went over with a double-assisted hot shot stun gun. That was a mouthful. I actually wrote that down. A double-assisted hot shot stun gun. I should have just said a stun gun combo. And then we got to see Terry at the booth making fun of the sorority in the front row. Again, the group that is way too excited to be on national cable television. He also did a great Nikita impersonation, mocking all his poses and the pro-American babyface verbiage. And after he put over that he would walk out of Starrcade as the unified TV champion, we also had Gilbert promising that he'd be the first to congratulate and raise Terry's hand. And right as Gilbert yells in Tony's face, "Aren't you excited, Tony?" Tony goes, "Yes, I'm very excited." With about that level of delivery. Glowing. That's what Tony was doing. Peachier than a fucking clam. Tony Schiavone in a nutshell, ladies and gents. Hasn't changed since 1987. Going back even before that. I'll tell you who wasn't peachy, though, was Jim Cornette. Despite that the Midnights were off doing charity work this week, this was Corny's opportunity to hard sell not just the scaffold match at Starrcade, but the War Games match in New York. Because it's Bobby and Stan's last chance to get their hands on Ricky and Robert before Starrcade. And he asked the Rock and Roll if they even have the guts to put away the Midnights in the scaffold match. If Bobby and Stan were dangling precariously over the edge of that platform, would Ricky and Robert even have the balls to send the Midnights barreling 20 feet down to the mat? Because the Midnights sure do. It is a valid question. Are Ricky and Robert too nice to finish the job? After their long, storied history with the Midnight Express, are they comfortable going so far as to kill them to finish off the rivalry? It's a good selling point. Just a shame this program didn't have that level of heat. It was not on the same level as the previous match they had with the Road Warriors last year. Then we had Barry, Windham, and Cougar J, which Barry won with a superplex in about a minute. Then he called out Larry Zbyszko, which I didn't really document much detail about. There was also something about Dr. Death in there, too. At this point, I'm just trying to move things along here since the rest of the show was very unnoteworthy. We had a sheepherder squash with Dave Isley and Tommy Angel, where for the second week in a row, sheepherder Luke was not wrestling. You had Johnny Ace filling in as Butch's partner. Makes me think he was injured. Did not stop him from screaming obscenities at the interview podium. Fuck, dude. I almost had to watch this entire thing on mute. I mean, the match sucked, but it only went like 2 minutes. Factoring Butch's commentary, it felt like 15. But Luke hit a middle rope knee drop for the 3 count, following a Johnny Ace power slam. And then Butch continued to scream at the podium for another 2 minutes, while Luke and Johnny stood there looking goofy. I had no idea what he said. Something about them wanting to beat all the top tag teams in the NWA. And then right at the end, Butch licked Luke's face. A precursor to what was about to come in a year's time span when they showed up on WWF TV and turned up the wackiness to about 150. It's probably what Vince saw when he was looking at tapes of the sheep herders. He saw them licking each other's face and he said, "I've got it, pal. We'll make them cartoon characters. That'll be such good shit." Then we had our TV main event. Well, actually, first we had Ricky Morton cutting off Robert Gibson mid-sentence because no one knew what the fuck he was saying to begin with. Marble Mouth Gibson. Nothing's changed. And then Ricky called out Cornette and said that they scraped their paths from the bottom up, and if the Midnights think the Rock and Roll don't have the guts to send them tumbling off a 20-foot platform, they obviously don't know what kind of men Ricky and Robert can be when they're pissed off. Cool. And then we had the actual TV main event. Coming off the heels of the random Baby Doll cameo we mentioned earlier. Guess who else was back this week? Shaska Whatley. Yeah. Him and Tiger Conway, of all people. They were in tag action against Alan Martin and The Menace. Or as Tony referred to them as, Jive Tones. The team of Shaska Whatley and Tiger Conway Jr. Jive Tones. Must have only been around for a cup of coffee because I don't remember anything about that tag team. Much like I don't remember much about anything Shaska Whatley's done since they shaved Jimmy Valiant's head last year during the Paul Jones Army feud. He shows up occasionally, works a match or two, and then he disappears for 8 months and you never hear from him. But he still moves and acts like Wacky Shaska used to. Here's everything you need to know about it. The match is fucking awful. Whatley and Conway fucked up virtually every double team spot they tried. They botched a double leg takedown at one point. So badly, in fact, that they actually tried it again a minute later just to save themselves. It still looked horrible. They picked up one of the job guys at one point and just recklessly dropped them face first on the mat. They had a really awkward double clothesline at the end where I'm pretty sure Conway didn't even make contact with the guy. And then they tried a choppy-looking Russian leg sweep where Conway looked like it was his first time actually executing that move in real time. So the better way to put it would be Tiger Conway was horrible, and Shaska was just trying to pick up the scraps. And then they cut a promo. I have no idea what they said. I had totally checked out by this point. And after that hideous match, I just wanted the show to be done and over with. Thank God it was. I mean, there were a few highlights, but by and large, the show was no good. You know, again, it's one of those deals where Starrcade's around the corner, but, I mean, this show was practically filled with all the UWF guys, most of which aren't even booked for the advertised Starrcade card. So, a lot of meaningless filler this week. This is the first time watching a Superstation program where I was like, did you really even need to air an episode? Can we just do the Starrcade show now since we've already promoted and plugged all the matches that are happening? You know, at this point, we're just treading water until the 26th. I mean, there is the excitement factor for sure. On the other hand, it's like, why did the show even need to happen? I mean, there are a couple good promos shoehorned in there, but really not much to say about it. And I have a lingering suspicion next week will be the same case. What I guess would be considered the go-home episode for the event. So here we are. Now 2 weeks removed from the infamous no DQ tag match. And in addition to DiBiase and Matt Bourne winning the Mid-South titles through nefarious means, thanks to Hacksaw Duggan in the gorilla outfit, we also have JYD forced out of the Mid-South area for 90 days. And it seemed like the Rat Pack was riding on Cloud 9 up until about a week ago. That was until we saw the debut of S. Lee, better known as Stagger Lee. And now the party face for the heels is being cut short because they smell a rat. And the first 20 minutes of this week's show was pretty much a timeline breakdown of everything that's going on with the Rat Pack, Stagger Lee, Junkyard Dog situation. For starters, we got Bill Watts talking with DiBiase and Bourne during a pre-taped interview. They're basically acknowledging the fact that JYD is under the Stagger Lee hood. They may be crafty, smug heels. They may need to resort to cheating here and there to get the job done. But no one ever said they're stupid. They're cunning. They know exactly what's going on. Dog's trying to pull a fast one on the Rat Pack, and all the baby faces and fans are sitting around pretending like there's nothing wrong with the Stagger Lee situation. And it's so genius with the way this is all being construed. Because even if Bill Watts secretly knows what's going on, like the fact that he's not willing to spill the beans openly, it's also great because at the same time, he's basically telling DiBiase, look, dude, 2 weeks ago, I had to sit here and be made to look like a damn fool because you guys stuck Duggan under a gorilla outfit and had him incognito for a kids event. So now you're all bent out of shape because you think JYD is hiding under a hood? You're just a bunch of hypocrites. Technically, he's not wrong. It's the same premise. Now, because it doesn't favor the heels, they're pissed about it. But now we're being told, in addition to Stagger Lee showing up last week and beating DiBiase in an impromptu match, now we hear that Stagger Lee is actually a childhood bully of the Junkyard Dog. So clearly it can't be Dog under the mask. And just to further prove that point, since DiBiase and Bourne are taking the bait, so to speak, Bill Watts has some footage to air to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Stagger Lee and JYD are not the same person. So we cut to some film of everybody gathering around earlier in the day to scout Tony Atlas, setting the bench press record at 550 pounds, to be exact. And sure enough, who should be in there in the frame but JYD and Stagger Lee? Side by side. And of course, Bill's trying to get an interview with Stagger Lee, but Dog ain't having it. He got him confirming, I brought Stagger Lee to the Mid-South area. He doesn't speak. I speak for him. Thank you very much. Yeah, he used to beat me up for my milk money when I was a kid. But he can make a hell of a lot more bank in Mid-South by beating up grown men. So that's why I brought him here. By far the most southern thing you'll ever hear in the world of wrestling. He had me at milk money. Goes to show how dated this show is. Even I'm not old enough to remember when the milk truck was a thing. Oh yeah, and meanwhile, there's Tony Atlas bench pressing 550 fucking pounds, while all the other storyline material is happening in the backdrop. No, the Atlas stuff is just window dressing, apparently. Now again, there's a lot to unpack in just that opening 20 minutes alone. But the gist of it is, DiBiase and Bourne are now on a mission to prove that Stagger Lee is the Junkyard Dog, because even that film isn't convincing enough evidence. They still think it's a setup. So Matt Bourne is going to wrestle Stagger Lee later on the show, and he's going to rip off the mask to prove to everybody that it's the dog. Because if he can prove it, then Dog suspension from Midsouth will be lengthened. Maybe even through the end of the calendar year. But the mask has to come off, and the visual has to be there on camera for everybody to see. So we'll revisit that a bit later on when we get to that match. First, let's talk about the worst 2-minute squash in Mid-South history. Nah, I'm just joshing. Wasn't that horrible, surprisingly. I was expecting much worse. It's Vladik Smirnov versus Mr. USA Tony Atlas. I think we've seen 1 or 2 Smirnov matches on Midsouth TV thus far, both of which have stunk up the joint immensely. I don't think this is long enough to be that hideous, but it was basically just 90 seconds of Atlas putting the guy in an arm wringer before giving him a fairly impressive-looking body press and then putting him away with a middle rope headbutt. That's where those 500-pound bench presses come in handy. That way he can pick up a 350-pound grown man with ease and slam him back down without breaking a sweat. But that was all just a tune-up for the Matt Bourne Stagger Lee match. And they didn't waste any time getting things off the ground here. They even kept the original folk song on the network instead of dubbing it over some generic tune. I wonder if that's a one-time thing or if they end up changing that down the road. Because they did the same thing with JYD's Another One Bites the Dust. Now, of course, given the circumstances from earlier, I mean, you figured this wasn't going to be a technical masterpiece. These guys are not out there to exchange holds this week. This is all about Matt Bourne doing anything in his power to expose Stagger Lee. He wants to prove dogs under that hood. So you basically had 3 or 4 minutes of Bourne ripping at Lee's mask, pretty much riding him like a caged monkey the entire time, going for that mask at any turn. And by the end, turns out it was all for naught. Because it was indeed a swerve. Now, the heels managed to pry off the mask, but it's not the Junkyard Dog. It is, as I wrote down here, another man of darker skin tone. Trying to avoid having the race card pulled on me for saying he was black, because I know there's some gray area there for all the easily triggered. An unidentified man was underneath the hood, as a decoy Stagger Lee then runs into the ring to send the heels packing. Presumably the real Stagger Lee, but how do we know? Well, here's what we proved. The heels could not prove that Stagger Lee was JYD, so their plot failed, at least temporarily. We'll see how desperate they are to prove it's dog under that hood. But until then, the babyfaces got the last laugh, and that's what the people came to see. And then we came back for Colonel Buck Robley and Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Tony Anthony and Marty Lundy. Tony Anthony, the future dirty white boy for all you historians out there. Or T.L. Hopper, if you like recounting bad WWF gimmicks from the late 90s. Oh, I'm sure we'll be adding him to that future list of all-time worst WWF ideas from the late 90s. It's amazing how much more bad shit is yet to come in the next few years during these Retro Raw recaps. I'm dreading it. It's very weird seeing Double A wrestle in a singlet. That was, different. I don't know what to make of that. Some people look fine in the wrestling singlet. Arn Anderson, not one of those guys. It's a very off-putting visual. Pretty basic stuff here. Robley and 2 worked over both guys for a couple minutes. They ended up going over Anthony with the running knee lift. No, Wrestling 2 ended up going over, I should say. I also did note the green paint marks on Wrestling 2's mask, which I believe Watts drew attention to, but I really don't know what was going on there. Perhaps it's of storyline significance. To be continued. It's the subtle things in Mid-South that always keep your eyes peeled to the TV. Because you look at something like that on its surface and you're like, doesn't seem like anything consequential, but, well, maybe it is. Then we had the Battle of the Big Canadians. Yeah, Reeser Bowden tried to give it the full pomp and circumstance. Did not get over in the building. The match is Kelly Kiniski versus Iron Mike Sharp. Between the utter silence of Kiniski's ring intro and the one single fan that chanted, "Yay!" when Sharp was introduced, with about that much enthusiasm, it was not the money match it was being propped up to be. I mean, the wrestling was fine. Kiniski's work in Mid-South is kind of like watching his work in Dallas a year or two later. Meaning that he's still more boring to watch than paint drying. But he's a decent athlete. Solid enhancement match to give Sharp a TV win. Really not much else to say about it. Kiniski made sure to kick out at 3.1 after Sharp gave him the lariat. That was irritating. Still trying to go into business for himself, even back in '82. Just because he was a son of a legend. Pitiful. Then we had Hacksaw Duggan and King Cobra, which is a pretty enjoyable little squash. Again, it was short. Definitely one of those breakneck pace matches where, they're trying to get in as much shit as they possibly can into such a small window. King Cobra did about 87 drop kicks in a row in the first minute in a rapid-fire succession. It looked impressive. But after Duggan gained control, he wound up catching Cobra with a spear tackle off the middle rope. One of those in-air collision spots when Cobra came down and Duggan immediately collided with him. It was a cool finish. And that left enough time for one more standby match. This week it's one of the grapplers going up against Chavo Guerrero Sr. Now this obviously predates when Chavo would eventually come back to Mid-South and do the tag team thing with Hector. And they were a pretty consistent tag team in the territory. But I think that was a couple years later. That might have been '84. It was actually kind of cool with what they did here. Factoring in this was still around the time where Mid-South was considered the land of the giants, so to speak. You look at a guy like Chavo. He's doing all this athletically impressive stuff with the grappler. Like things you would rarely, if ever, see on Mid-South TV to begin with. And it actually ended up hooking the crowd for almost the entire match. Like Chavo's in there doing a lot of flashy offense. A lot of lucha-inspired work that, again, you just didn't see all that much of in the Mid-South territory by this point in '82. And it's one of those things where, because the crowd wasn't used to seeing it all that often, when they're watching Chavo do flying head scissor takeovers and bow and arrow submissions, plus the big suicide dive at the end that led up to the finishing sequence, it's like, holy shit. We didn't even know any of that stuff was humanly possible. Now, of course, the problem is you see suicide topes 15 times in every match, with all the undercard guys, no less. I mean, there's nothing special about it anymore because everybody does it, compared to when you would only see this stuff sparingly back in the day. Well, at least in the States, maybe not so much internationally, but watching Bill Watts mark out for the suicide dive, part of me wonders how he would react to some of the shit we see today. Springboard planchas and corkscrew 450s. I mean, he'd probably fart in his general direction for looking phony half the time. But this was a clever little way to go out this week. Instead of going with a conclusive finish with Chavo going over or, even having the grappler win by cheating, they had Chavo start to pull off the grappler's boot, since that was part of the gimmick, was loading the boot. So Chavo targeted the boot, tried to fend off whatever gimmick he was trying to conceal inside of it. And the last thing we see is Chavo struggling to rip off the guy's boot as they picture the closing credits. The fans are on their feet because they're all kind of excited to see the exploitation of the gimmick. But it worked out great. Left everybody on a high note, and we're kind of thinking in suspension whether or not Chavo actually got the boot off. Nice little cliffhanger of sorts. And it was a fun way to wrap up a pretty good episode from top to bottom. Again, a lot of recap going on this week for the first half of the show. The matches were more or less inconsequential this week, but, the bigger story is everything surrounding the nature of the Stagger Lee material. It's all a guessing game right now. We don't really know the ins and outs of the current situation, but we're getting plenty of curveballs thrown in our way. Now we've got a duplicate Stagger Lee to contend with. Makes the Rat Pack's mission to uncover the mystery that much more difficult. So we'll see how it all unfolds. But beyond that, pretty paint-by-numbers program this week. And that takes us over to the Sportatorium. Fresh set of tapings, I believe. With the Cotton Bowl event in the rear-view mirror, we are now gearing up for the next Star Wars event. And, no. Unfortunately, their creative juices weren't flowing with this week's main event. When Bill Mercer announced at the top of the program that this week's main event was going to be the Von Erichs versus Killer Khan and Missing Link, I immediately shit my pants on purpose. Not out of fear, but anger. Sheer anger. And for the record, don't let anyone fool you. It is humanly possible to shit on command. Just requires a little bit of additional force. So, we were not off to a great start. Luckily, they made up for things in the interim. First, they aired a replay of the mixed tag showdown at the Cotton Bowl event. Stella May French and Mike Von Erich versus Nicola Roberts and Gino Hernandez, which was mainly noted for the return of Sunshine, as we talked about during last week's podcast. However, we had more continuation with the Sunshine story this week. Now that we're back at the Sportatorium, Stella May was with Mark Lawrence during an interview earlier in the day. It actually took me until seeing this all go down in real time to realize that it was actually a pre-tape. Because there was no indication when the video first aired. But, Stella's in the ring talking about Sunshine's return, how it was all supposed to be a one-off appearance, and then she would kind of go back to Florida for the time being. So she's kind of covering all that. And here come Gino and Lady Giant. And as I wrote down here directly, boy, did this escalate quickly. Within a matter of seconds, Nicola cheap shots Stella right in the gut, plants her with a DDT and leaves her for dead. I shit myself again when I saw that DDT. But this time it was out of fear because I would not trust Baby Doll to hit me with a word DDT if my life depended on it. But they laid her out so they could then cut off strands of her perm, which was definitely something they would regret shortly thereafter. Because once they show all that, we go back to the Sportatorium again, and this time we're led to believe it's live. You get Gino and Nicola in the ring patting themselves on the back, laughing at the whole scene. And while they're in the middle of their whole deal, Sunshine makes her way out to the crowd to basically let Gino and Nicola know that they done fucked up. She tells Gino that he made two bold mistakes. One was cutting Stella's hair, which she's never going to forget, and the other was toying with Sunshine. Now, of course, Gino's trying to blow it off because he's like, bitch, what are you going to do to me? Well, she certainly could not take Gino in a fist fight. So when in doubt, break out the mace. That's a ladylike thing to do. So yeah, she blinds Gino and Lady Giant, then begins to kick Gino in the ribs while he's down selling. In high heels, by the way. And, well, it was definitely a hot segment. Stella's promo before the heel beatdown was kind of hard in the ears. But she sold the DDT great. And the hair trim job was pretty heavy. I'm sure next time we see Stella on TV, she's going to come fully loaded. That is not a woman to mess with, as we've seen plenty of times on this program. It was good stuff, though. You know, it continues the feud along. The heels get some of their heat back after the big Sunshine return to the Cotton Bowl. So I like where this is all going. They planted the seeds for some big stuff. Then we came back for another Cotton Bowl exclusive. Also what I deem the greatest segment in the history of World Class. And that's not just because it involved Hacksaw Butch Reed. Now on paper, it was supposed to be Butch Reed and Kerry Von Erich in an arm wrestling contest. In actuality, it was Butch Reed versus the flimsy table they had propped up for both men. The table won. Now, I won't bore you with the details of the actual arm wrestling mechanics, but needless to say, during their back-and-forth exchanges where both guys were looking for leverage, now there were several points where I had to remind myself to breathe because I was actually on edge. Legitimately, the only time I can recall in the last 30-something years of watching wrestling where the arm wrestling contest actually had me hooked. But the real star of the segment was Butch Reed. Among some of his classic quotes here, in addition to belittling Kerry and cutting the heat promo on him to stall for time, during the first exchange, where it looked like Kerry actually pinned Butch's hand down, the table legs gave out. So as Butch is flipping his lid at the ref, he yells directly to the main floor cam, "That table sucks." And then I believe I heard him utter the words, "That ain't shit," at least 3 or 4 times. And then when the same thing happened during the second face-off, Butch also said the word shit at least 3 or 4 more times. It was by far the highlight of the entire program. Hacksaw Butch Reed never disappoints. A real true treasure. I mean, the whole segment probably went like 5 or 6 minutes, but it was so awesome. Watching Butch Reed legitimately get pissed at a fragile table. Because I think the legs were legitimately caving in. I don't think that was a work. Because that was a really weird looking table. And the best part, it happened not once, but twice. Fucking amazing. Now, granted, I don't know what any of this had to do with the other storylines that were going on pertaining to the Cotton Bowl, but I don't know, for a brief little buffer segment to kill time on the show, it was highly entertaining. Also entertaining reliving that time in the parking lot where Terry Bam Bam Gordy cut that promo on Bill Mercer for putting his hands on the Freebirds hippie van. For anybody that has no idea what I'm referring to, that was a thing that happened weeks ago, as a matter of fact. It's like shortly before the Freebirds left World Class for that brief window, they shot a segment in the parking lot where Mercer was trying to interview Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. And when Mercer went to open the back door to get a word with Gordy, he came storming out of the van, started flipping shit immediately. He was so pissed he even took a back bump on the concrete. All because that pesky Mercer didn't knock first. Good times. And they also followed that with re-airing the angle from several weeks back, where they had to interrupt a Mike Von Erich Bill Irwin match to immediately pitch to a Killer Khan Terry Gordy fight. Now, the long and short of the story was, I think Gordy and Khan were set to wrestle later on that same show, but somehow they wound up fighting each other in the locker room beforehand. So, they called off the match that was going on in the ring at that time, and that brought out Gordy and the rest of the crew here, waiting for Khan to come to the ring. Of course, Gordy's out there a bloody mess, and it turns into an impromptu angle where they start wailing away on each other. Can't even really call it much of a match, because, all of Devastation Inc. was out there in the ring at the same time. Freebirds are out there. I believe it was one of the last things they actually shot with the Freebirds before their temporary departure, because they had been doing that weird TV feud with Devastation Inc. It was a strange dichotomy where it was basically heel versus heel, even though the Freebirds were still technically feuding with the Von Erichs at the same time. So the fans were having to pick and choose sides. There was a lot going on in that story. It was just kind of all over the map. But, that was all mainly a setup, because that carried over into this week's show, where they shot another big angle. And remember how I was referring to the Freebird departure that lasted all of 2 months? Well, their WWF venture was basically done by this point, because Gordy was back this week. And we saw him jumping Killer Khan in the ring during a dark match. Came out wearing street clothes and started immediately pounding away on Khan with his cowboy boot. No Hayes or Roberts, though. Just Terry Gordy in the picture. So they're reigniting that unresolved tension with them and Devastation Inc. It's still a bizarre scenario where you get some fans chanting for Gordy. Meanwhile, he's out there basically working like a heel. So in a way, we're kind of picking up where we left off right before the Freebirds left with such short notice. We'll definitely see how this develops over the next couple weeks. You got the Thanksgiving Star Wars event coming up pretty soon. I imagine that'll just be Gordy and Khan in a singles match. And they might carry that over into the Christmas Star Wars special, and we'll see what they do for a blow-off there. Then we had some more recap footage. Here they were detailing the Chris Adams Kevin Von Erich saga, beginning with the Adams heel turn from about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And this is the angle where Kevin and Chris got into the argument over Stella accidentally tripping up Chris, which cost them the match with Gino and Jake. Then they had the whole thing where Chris shoved Stella, and Kevin wasn't having any of that. So when Kevin shoved Chris back, he gave Kevin the receipt by planting him with a super kick, and that kind of facilitated the heel turn. That's all well documented. We covered that in the World Class reviews. But they end up showing the Cotton Bowl event again. The replay of the chair shot of doom. The lethal blow to the back of the head where Chris whacked Kevin with a folding chair. Kevin was bleeding out from the back of the cranium, getting carted off in the ambulance. And they had Mercer try to conduct an interview with Kevin to touch on the incident. But Kevin basically said that it's too degrading. It's way too humiliating to recount an event like that. So he didn't want to see the footage aired. He did let everybody know that he's going to give Chris the same receipt. Because if there's one thing that's never happened to Kevin during his entire life, it's having to get carted off the field because he wasn't able to walk on his own 2 feet. He also showed these stitches in his head, which looked quite gruesome. But the interview was kind of a bust because Kevin didn't really want to address anything. It was good stuff, though. Can't put over enough how well done that angle was the previous week. Probably could have ended the show right there, because then we had Kerry and Mike versus Killer Khan and Missing Link, which ended up just turning into a free-for-all by the time it was over. Because right before they rang the bell, we had the TV return of Chick Donovan, who, if you recall, had been put on the shelf by Devastation Inc. weeks back. That was when Killer Khan targeted the knee and put him out of action. So Chick is back, cleared by the doctors officially, and he has his sights set on General Skandar Akbar, since he's responsible for Chick's initial injury to begin with. So you had Chick battling with Akbar here. You had the other 4 going at it. Tornado rules, basically. Everyone was kind of just doing random shit for a few minutes. Somewhere in the mess, Terry Gordy ran back out and started brawling again with the heels. I honestly don't remember all the details of what was going on. I do remember Mark Lorenz's announcement, though, after David Manning threw the match out. His exact quote: "At 1 minute and 18 seconds, both sides have been thrown out due to complete mayhem." And he was not wrong. I mean, they really didn't have enough time to do a full match because there was only like 3 minutes left of airtime. But it was a fun little chaotic way to go out. The world-class brawls are always fun because the crowd goes ballistic for all the pandemonium. Again, this was back when you would only see this stuff sparingly and not 30 times per show. But I like the way they formatted everything this week. It was kind of a combination of story follow-up and tying up loose ends with all the angles they shot at the Cotton Bowl event. But they also continued and advanced things going on for the Star Wars event. Packed a lot of action into the 45-minute window here. I mean, normally World Class only has like 3 or 4 things going on in a given program that they actually draw attention to. Here, I think they had at least 5 or 6, counting all the pre-tapes and the previous angles. So, even though there wasn't a whole lot going on with the wrestling side of things, it was still a reasonably good show. I mean, the turnaround between the Cotton Bowl and the Thanksgiving Star Wars is pretty quick. So I think they were trying to use this one to really push the big feuds for the Star Wars event. Because I guess you could basically call this a glorified go-home show. They were kind of rushed to hard sell the card at the last minute. But a lot of nice surprises on this one. Definitely a show that kept you on your toes. And I do like that. Yeah. Rounding out things on this one. That'll take us to the end of this week's Friday edition of the FSWR show. Again, thanks everybody for stopping by to check the show out. Make sure you subscribe, comment, like the program. You can check us out on Rumble too if you have a preference on various platforms that are not YouTube. So we will reconvene on Monday. And I think we have one more normally scheduled Monday program, and the next week is going to be the big showdown, because we got to figure out how to fit basically 3 pay-per-view recaps into one weekend. I'll get back to you on the details with that. But thanks everybody for watching, and take care of yourselves. Peace out.